Have you ever really stopped to think about what our government might be preparing for? Behind the scenes, beyond what we usually talk about, things that, well, if they were actually happening, could fundamentally change everything. Today, we're doing a deep dive into some pretty significant claims. We're looking at source material that asserts the U.S. Army is preparing for urban warfare right here on American soil,
Yeah.
and that this could potentially lead to martial law, major societal shifts. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, the sources we're looking at today, it's this really extensive compilation. It includes things presented as, official government documents, military manuals, different analyses. Our job here is to carefully go through these claims, look at the so-called evidence they present, and really understand the picture the source is painting.
Absolutely. And these are, well, they're very serious claims. Our role isn't to agree or disagree, but to critically examine what this specific source material is putting forward. We're focusing strictly on what the source asserts, the narrative it builds, the facts it uses. We want to help you understand the details and the implications the source itself suggests are coming.
Cool, let's get into it then. The source kicks things off by saying martial law isn't just some, dusty legal theory. It says it's absolutely real.
Hmm.
And just to be clear, martial law means basically the military takes over direct rule instead of civilian government, usually in an emergency. Ordinary laws get suspended. The source claims this is actually pretty easy for the government to implement. So what's the mechanism? How does the source say this could happen?
Right. The core piece of evidence the source points to is the John Warner Defense Authorization Act of 2006. This was signed by George W. Bush. And the source really hammers this point. It claims this act gives the president the sole power, the sole discretion to declare martial law.
Sole discretion.
Yeah, during what it calls a public emergency. And critically, the source claims this can happen without needing Congress to approve it. It also argues that this act effectively canceled out the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878.
Ah, right. The act that generally forbids using the military for domestic law enforcement.
Exactly. So the source says that restriction is essentially gone now because of the 2006 Act. And it goes even further. It claims the president can even seize control of state National Guard units without even needing to, talk to the state governors first.
Wow. Okay. So that's the supposed legal framework.
Yeah.
But the source doesn't stop there, right? It claims there are active preparations happening now, things the Pentagon and the national security structure are doing.
Yes, that's the next big claim. The source is very direct. It says the Pentagon is preparing for massive civil unrest, and it uses the phrase urban warfare on United States soil. That's specifically what it says the Army's getting ready for.
Urban warfare here. What evidence does it offer for that?
Well, one example it gives is a written reminder. It claims the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff sent this out to all U.S. troops before a recent election. This reminder apparently told troops to remember their oath, follow the chain of command. And the source interprets this not as routine, but as a sign of deep underlying concern within the military leadership about potential instability, something they felt they had to remind the troops about.
Okay. Now, tied into all this, you often hear about FEMA camps. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot online. The source addresses this head on, doesn't it?
It does, very directly. The source states, quote, FEMA camps are absolutely real, full stop.
And the proof, what does it point to?
It claims to have gathered over 2,000 pages of what it calls official documents. These are supposedly from various U.S. government agencies, even the UN. It tries to lend weight to the claim by citing specifics, like a military manual, allegedly issued by the order of the Secretary of the Army.
A military manual.
Okay.
What does it supposedly say?
It describes, according to the source, a civilian inmate labor program for civilians taking place on U.S. Army bases. The source even says it has layouts from these documents, details of facilities for compliant detainees, including things like interrogation rooms and tribunals.
Tribunal. Like military courts for civilians.
That seems to be the implication the source draws from the term, yes. It emphasizes these details to build a case that these aren't just empty camps, but planned facilities with specific functions.
So if we follow the source's logic, martial law is declared, potentially using the John Warner Act. The military is prepared for urban unrest, and these facilities exist. What happens to people's rights?
Well, according to the source, if martial law is declared, the Constitution is effectively suspended.
Suspended, like completely.
That's the claim. The source states explicitly, you lose your First Amendment rights, your Second Amendment rights. You wouldn't have the right to know why you're being detained or the right to a lawyer. Everything shifts to military justice.
And does it give more detail on what that looks like?
It does. It highlights details allegedly from those manuals again. Things like guard towers with instructions that anybody attempting to escape should be shot. It also claims that martial law usually involves confiscating firearms, imposing curfews, suspending civil law, and habeas corpus, the right to challenge your detention in court.
Any real-world examples it points to?
The source uses the aftermath of the Boston Marathon bombing as an example of what it considers martial law in practice. You know, the lockdown, tanks on the streets, people told to stay inside. It presents that as a kind of trial run or illustration.
Okay, so the source lays out how it could happen and what it might look like. But why? What does it say would actually trigger this kind of breakdown? What are the catalysts?
The source points fingers primarily at political division and unrest. It specifically mentions ridiculous anger from the left, and it claims certain groups are actively planning violence. It cites, for instance, George Soros's group, claiming it has a stated intent to make the United States ungovernable.
So political chaos creating a pretext.
That's the implication, that this manufactured or escalating disorder would reach a point where the government feels justified or even obligated to declare martial law simply to restore order.
But it's not just political triggers, is it? The source also talks about economics, a major collapse.
Oh, absolutely. It paints a really grim economic picture. It predicts a total meltdown where credit is going to be cut off. It talks about the nation becoming bankrupt, the dollar becoming worthless, massive problems with imports, meaning we couldn't produce enough goods or even feed everyone.
Any specific data points it uses to back that up? Some of those sound quite extreme.
It does use some very stark statistics. For example, it makes a shocking claim related to Obama's recovery, asserting that 13 million teenagers at least once traded sexual acts for food.
Wow, that's quite a claim.
It is, and it uses claims like that to underscore the severity of the predicted collapse. It also warns about the U.S. losing its status as the global reserve currency.
And the consequence of that, according to the source.
It says that scenario will make, and this is a direct quote, Mad Max look like reality. So, utter societal breakdown stemming from economic collapse.
Now, this is interesting. The source talks about who knows about these impending threats. It suggests there's a difference between what the average person knows and what the elite know.
Yes, it leans heavily on this idea. It literally asks the question, what is it that the elite know that you don't? It even cites a Bloomberg article by Noah Smith, not to agree with Smith's overall point perhaps, but to pull out the idea that the super rich have access to much better information.
Better information that helps them how?
For investments, primarily, according to the source's use of the article, it contrasts this with how poor people get wiped out in crises because they lack this insider knowledge.
And does it offer proof that the elite are acting on this supposed better information?
It points to the trend of billionaires building underground bunkers. It claims there's been a 700% increase this year alone. The argument is, these people aren't stupid. They aren't just wasting money. They're acting on intelligence the rest of us don't have. They're preparing.
So prepping is part of it.
Yeah, the source notes that prepping and survivalism, which used to be seen as kind of fringe, are losing that stigma. They're being taken more seriously now, implying this is a rational response to hidden knowledge.
Given all this, the secret plans, the hidden knowledge, it seems, the source has a pretty low opinion of traditional information channels.
Extremely low. It's a recurring theme. The source flat out states that American institutions, and it lumps in mainstream media and academia, quote, just lie.
Just lie. That's quite a statement.
Yes, and therefore, it argues, you can't get honest information unless, quote, you do it yourself. You have to dig for it, rely on alternative sources, like the one we're examining.
Does it give an example of this alleged lying?
It specifically calls out Snopes, the fact-checking website. It claims Snopes was wrong as usual and thoroughly debunked on stories related to the positioning of UN trucks and troops within the U.S., implying Snopes was covering up preparations.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here. The source's claims about the ease of declaring martial law via the John Warner Act, the alleged military prep for urban warfare, the reality of FEMA camps based on supposed documents, the potential suspension of the Constitution, the political and economic triggers, the idea that elites know more, and the deep distrust of mainstream information. It's a very comprehensive and alarming picture it paints.
It certainly is. Presented with a lot of conviction and, as we've noted, constant reference to what it claims are official documents and evidence. And just to reiterate, our aim today wasn't to validate these claims, but to lay out the perspective presented in this source material, to help you understand the arguments it makes, the evidence it cites, how it constructs its narrative.
Right. It's a narrative that definitely pushes towards extreme vigilance, self-reliance, maybe even distrust, based on its interpretation of these documents and events. So as you've listened to this deep dive into the source's perspective, what part of it stands out most to you? And perhaps more pointedly, if you were to take these claims as presented by the source at face value, what would be the single most critical piece of knowledge or maybe preparation one could have in that kind of scenario? Something to think about.